I've heard so many times over the years, and I read something recently about it, and it kind of stimulated a thought in me, and that is, was the mafia really involved with the Catholic Church? Hey everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well. All is very good, very blessed on this end. And as always, I give God all the praise, honor, and glory, and thanks for that. Subscribe. We're on that march to 1 million. We're getting close, and yes, there's going to be a giveaway. So, tonight I'm going to get into something that I've heard so many times over the years, and I read something recently about it, and it kind of stimulated a thought in me, and that is, was the mafia really involved with the Catholic Church? And the Catholic Church gets a bad rap about a lot of things, some of it deserved. We know with all the problems they had with some of the priests and, the accusations and the things that we've discovered about, certain acts of pedophilia and things like that, which we understand. But you don't blame the entire church for things like that. You can't throw a blanket over everything. I mean, the Catholic Church has done a lot of good. We have, a major Catholic population, not only here in the United States, but throughout the world. And for the most part, the Catholic Church is a good, faithful body. But every once in a while, things happen like in any other organization. Now, I can state to you pretty emphatically right now that the mafia has no control in the Catholic Church, nor did they ever. Was there some kind of involvement here and there? You got to understand this. In Italy, there are so many priests and bishops and people involved with the church, and the mafia has such a huge presence in Italy that of course they're going to come across one another, without a doubt. I'm sure there are many priests that had relatives that were involved in the mafia. Couldn't help it. So sometimes, did they treat mafia people favorably? Yeah. Well, they're supposed to, at least initially. You're not supposed to condemn everybody because they're a member of the mafia and say, hey, you're going to hell automatically. That's not how, Christians work. We're not judgmental in that way. We feel everybody has a chance to repent their sins, accept Christ, and go to heaven. So that's the basis of the Catholic Christian faith. And we're guys in the mafia, most all of them, we're all Catholics. Just about everybody. Listen, here in the United States, on Ash Wednesday, and when Lent began, I saw a lot of guys would go to church and they'd get ashes. I think it's a good thing in Italy. It was a good thing for many of the guys in the mafia to be associated with the Catholic Church. It was kind of a prestigious thing. It was kind of a thing that showed, hey, we're not such bad guys. But let me go back to where this all might have began, and let me dispel this right away. Godfather 3, totally fictional. Michael Corleone's involvement with the church at that point in time, totally fictional. There was no basis in fact or reality for that at all. I don't care what anybody tells you. It was a fictional story. So, understand that. But I think a lot of people got the perception of the mafia controlling the Catholic Church or being involved with the Catholic Church or the Vatican. A lot of that perception came from Godfather 3. Let's get rid of that right now because it's not true. A lot of people have a tendency on YouTube to get something and then run with it. They hear something, it's a conspiracy theory, they think about something, they hear, and they run with it as if it's a fact. And I've heard people on social media talk about this. It's not a fact. But let's go back a little bit to where this may have come out a little bit. Prior to 1929, the Catholic Church in Italy was really struggling. The Vatican was struggling. They had a bad relationship with the government for some reason. They never got together. And prior to 1929, I can't get into all the reasons because I didn't research it, but Catholic Church was in financial straits. It was broke in the Vatican. I mean, really in bad shape. I don't know what they did with some of their real estate holdings. They might have made some bad investments, but they were really in bad shape. Cut to Mussolini coming into power. Now understand this, Mussolini was an atheist. He had no regard for the Catholic Church at that point. He had no regard for God or for any religion. He was an atheist. But he was also an opportunist, and he wanted to take over control of Italy. And he knew that in order to do so, he'd have to have a relationship with the Vatican, with the Catholic religion, because so many Italians were Catholic. And if he was at odds with them and he opposed them, that would be a problem for him among the people in Italy. So, being an opportunist, he, I think, knew Pope Pius, and they got together somehow. And they formed a relationship. Now, what did the Catholic Church at that point need? They needed money. And I believe Mussolini gave him $90 million if the Catholic Church would support him in his bid to take control of Italy. Now, remember, he wasn't a communist. Mussolini hated communism, and so did the Catholic Church at that point in time. He created fascism, which is not communist. There is a difference. So the Pope and Mussolini get together, and some of the agreements that they came out of, I knew that was important to the Catholic Church, is they separated church and state, and that's when Vatican City actually became its own city-state as a result of the relationship and the deal that Pope Pius made with Mussolini. So, Catholic Church gets $90 million. Mussolini gets the Catholic Church support. He eventually does get into power, and I think we know, I'm not going to go into a whole history lesson about that. But along the way, when Hitler gets involved, and by the way, you know, Hitler was, he idolized Mussolini. I think he had a bust of Mussolini in his office in Germany. However, Mussolini was not on board with Hitler with regard to communism. Mussolini started to get more Hitler-like in that he was very narcissistic. He called himself Il Duce. He wanted to be the solemn leader, the sovereign leader. It started to get Pope Pius and the church a bit nervous. That's not what they were looking for. There was also a deal where some of the Jews in Italy were going to be persecuted as a result of Mussolini's further alignment with Hitler. It was becoming very, very uncomfortable. And at one point in time, the Catholic Church had to break away from Mussolini. But here's the thing, where did the Mafia get involved? Well, Mussolini was anti-Mafia. There was an incident in Sicily when he went down there to try to bring, Sicily under his control, and the Mafia leader there didn't give him much deference. And for some reason, there was some bad blood spilled between the Mafia and Mussolini, and at that point, Mussolini decided he was going to crush the Mafia. The Mafia hated communism back then. They were against communism. The Catholic Church hated communism back then. So the Catholic Church and the Mafia didn't have that much bad blood. It was really more directed toward Mussolini. So things kind of softened between the Catholic Church and the Mafia. And the Mafia back then, way before, they were a group that was looking to help the common people. That's how it started. Anyway, as a result of Mussolini's looking to crush the Mafia in Sicily and in Italy, that's when many of them migrated here. Many of the guys in the Mafia migrated to the United States, and then the Mafia, Cosa Nostra, was born here in the United States. But there was no real involvement at that point in time, other than, some of the priests knowing guys in the Mafia and, relationships formed that way. But the Mafia did not have control of the Catholic Church. Nowhere in history does it say that. But here's what happens. Into the, I think the early or the mid-60s, there was a guy by the name of Michel Sindona. Now, Michel Sindona was a banker, basically, and he was a brilliant guy, from what I understand. Somehow, he gets involved with the Vatican to manage a lot of the Vatican's money. He also had relationships with the Mafia. That's a fact, no doubt about that. As a matter of fact, Sindona was laundering money for the Mafia's drug trade in Italy at the time. So there definitely was a relationship there. The Catholic Church didn't do their homework. They didn't, vet him that well. I don't think they knew about it. As a matter of fact, I can almost state emphatically they didn't know about his relationship with the Mafia. And he was kind of managing the Vatican's money, making investments for them, doing very well for a time. He was making a ton of money. I think he was a billionaire. He actually bought a bank, Franklin National Bank, I think, in the United States. I remember that bank. I used to bank there. The bank eventually went broke. Sindona, as a result of the bank going broke, lost a ton of money. And then something happened over a period of time where he just about went broke. He got indicted for fraud. He ended up going to jail here in the United States. He was extradited back to Italy. He was prosecuted in Italy, and he was convicted and sent to prison. And I think a day or two after he got in prison in Italy, he was poisoned. They killed him. And I think the way I heard it, the Mafia was concerned that he was going to turn informant and start talk about some of the relationships that he had here in the United States. I do know that he was involved with the Gambino family. I did hear at the time that Carlo Gambino had control over him, was working with him. I know they were putting pressure on him. The Gambino family was. They were owed money, and when he crashed, because he had made investments for the mob also, but when he crashed and got in trouble, the mob was upset with him. my former associates, and they were going after him. So that's where the relationship was. But the Catholic Church really didn't know about it. It wasn't that they got in bed with the mafia and wanted to do business with them. They weren't taking mafia money at that time at all. And the money that they did take from Mussolini had nothing to do with the mafia, because Mussolini hated the mafia. So, I want to put this to rest, that the mafia did not have control of the Catholic Church at any point in time. Their major involvement really came with Michele Sedona, who the Catholic Church did not know was dealing with the mafia also. If they made any mistake, it was that they didn't vet them well enough. They didn't vet Sedona well enough. Really, that was it. So hopefully we put that to bed. And again, Godfather 3, it was a fictional story. But people start to assume from that point in time that the mafia had so much control. I hear it now, that the mafia is controlling the Vatican. Nonsense. The Vatican has got a ton of money on their own. They made it investments. They're a city-state of their own. They don't need the mafia. Now, recently, within the last couple of years, Pope Francis visited Sicily. And I read an article. It says, Pope tells Sicily's mafia, you cannot believe in God and be mafioso. Some I believe that. I want to read some of this. I think it was a very interesting article. And this should put it to bed. Whatever you might have thought that the mafia is involved in any way, even in Italy, this should put it to bed, okay? I want to read some of it from you. Pope Francis has appealed to Sicily's mafia to abandon lives of crime and violence, saying the island needed men and women of love, not men and women of honor, using the term mobsters applied to themselves. Speaking on Saturday, back then, in the Sicilian capital, Francis said members of organized criminal networks, many of whom go to church and worship openly, cannot believe in God and be mafioso at the same time. In his appeal, he referred to them as dear brothers and sisters. The Pope visited Palermo to commemorate Father Giuseppe Puglisi, a priest shot dead by mafia hitmen in 1993 after he challenged the organization's control over one of the city's toughest neighborhood. Puglisi was killed on his 56th birthday during a bloody mafia offensive against the state and anyone else who threatened the group's existence. So you see, a person who is a mafioso does not live as a Christian, because with his life he blasphemes against the name of God. Francis said that in the sermon of a mass for some 80,000 people in the port area of the Sicilian capital. I say to the mafioso, change, brothers and sisters. Stop thinking about yourselves and your money. Convert yourselves to the real God and do the right thing, basically. So this is Pope Francis now, recently, within the last couple of years. And people, made me think of things. I was brought up a Catholic. I was in Catholic school from kindergarten right through high school. I was an altar boy the whole bit. But for some reason, for me, Catholicism was more like a subject in school. I didn't take it, with me. I didn't live it, and I didn't really practice it as I do now, and I realized that, Christianity in itself is really all about a relationship with Jesus Christ. So, I agree with him. You can't be a member of the mafia and willingly and knowingly commit some of the acts that are done and abide by the oath that you take and call yourself a Catholic. You can't do it. It's the same way, there's certain things that are anti-Catholic, that Catholics are so far against. And people today, even in government, and I'm not going to get into all of that, I want to get into the politics, but they claim to be Catholics, and yet they're living and advocating for things that are against Catholicism, strongly against Catholicism. So, I think in order to live a certain faith, you got to live it all the way, you got to believe it all the way, and you can't knowingly and willingly on a daily basis act in contradiction to what your faith teaches. And actually, as a member of the mob, you're doing that. You can't be a real member of the mafia and claim to be a Catholic. You might believe in God, you might honor the Catholic Church in some way, but you're not acting as a Catholic. So, that's really all I got to say about it. I just wanted to dispel the myth today that, Catholics, that the Catholic Church is involved with the mafia some way, or ever has been involved, or was ever controlled by the mafia, or was ever, using mafia money. If anything, they used Mussolini's money at that time. He drummed up 90 million for them at a time that they really needed it, but even that relationship went sour. So let's look, the Catholic Church has had issues over the years. We know that. Like any other organization, people have issues. It's just the way life is. We live in a fallen world. But let's not pin that on the Catholic Church, that they are in any way controlled by the mafia or have been in any way. maybe little pockets here and there where a priest might be involved. It's just the way things go. But I want to dispel that myth and at least give the Catholic Church a break in that regard, because they get hit upon quite a bit. So that's it for today. Again, I just try to give you the best information that I possibly can. So how do I always leave you? Same way. Be safe, be healthy, and I sincerely mean this. May God bless all of you. And hopefully in this election process, we got the right people in office now that are going to do the right thing for this country, because we are in a tough, tough, tough time, certainly in my lifetime. And I really hope that whoever was elected, they start to do the right thing for the country, not for themselves, but for the country. That's what we're praying for. So that's it for today. I will see you next time. Take care.